Oh, hello there. Yeah, well, we're kind of sauntering our way through midweek. Well, I know I am anyway. Yes. Small amounts of work to do, which is just kind of interfering with my generic having a bit of a laze. Yes. Anyway, one of the problems that right wing parties have is, well, amongst the many problems, amongst the huge number of problems that right-wing parties have, is trying to persuade us all that there is a perfect time in the past that we could magically go back to when everything was fine. It tends to be centred on a period which is either exactly round about the time you were born or 10 years previously. And, Reform do this a lot. Nigel Farage, even though he wasn't born in the 50s, will hark back to a mythical time in the 1950s when presumably people were still dying of diphtheria. Anyway, come on to that a bit more. But, when you look at photographs, they might well appear to be sort of, contain the very, very similar groups of people. But we know realistically that they don't. For example, there's the usual non-diverse group of blokes here in badly fitting suits. Dear God, they're badly fitting. If you're going to buy a decent suit, buy a decent suit. And of course, as inevitably the only token young person there is the actual candidate who, is equally diverse in so many other ways that various people there wouldn't like. And what you can't see in this photograph is the number of people in in Reform that probably would be a lot keener on ex-members of the party in terms of MPs in Parliament rather than anything else. And of course there is a token woman. Which brings us perhaps neatly on to Britain First, who do like to bang on about these things. A lot of fascist parties will imagine a rural past. It's often a key thing when the Aryan workers in the fields, but it doesn't really work in Britain because we have much more of an industrial past than other countries. So in this country it tends to be an imagined industrial past, and what is better than early colorized film of people walking jerkily who mainly look white. And Paul Golding and Britain First do like to do this one. So we get this: before diversity, before multiculturalism, before immigration, a beautiful city. Well, London still is a beautiful city. I remember it growing up in the 60s, 70s, etc. It was beautiful then. I think it's still beautiful now. It depends where you go, really. Had its awful areas. But the imagined past of the 20s, in Paul's mind, of course, doesn't contain those inconvenient bits that he doesn't like. For example, if we go back to the 1920s, women didn't have the vote, mostly. Okay, realistically, any form of real suffrage doesn't come until 1928, and women still basically were regarded as simply an adjunct illegally to their husbands, a little more than realistically possessions. Yes. Plus, of course, the actual statistics from the 1921 census, if you care to look at it, does give London as a fairly diverse city in terms of the percentages of people from other bits of the empire, which Paul really wouldn't like, obviously. Can't have that. Mustn't be true. 'Tis, unfortunately, the census, especially in those days, didn't lie. But if you think about the wider stuff that was going on in London in the 1920s, of course, the British Empire was at its full height, and it had only just stopped monstrously exploiting the people at home. So we end up with, groups in these photographs who are members of the white working class, and although they look reasonably well dressed because people would not wear cheap suits when they went out, a lot of them would have had very, very miserable upbringings which would have been in abject poverty. We had in the 1920s just come out of a particularly gruesome world war where an awful lot of people aren't in this photograph because they died. They had been promised a land fit for heroes, let's not forget, and yet they'd been sold down the river because, nobody actually in the ruling Conservative Party, including of course, Winston Churchill, wanted to give them that. You can look at infant mortality, rates of disease. There's no antibiotics here, yeah? These are people who very much are hoping for a better future, and they won't get one until there's been another world war caused by the same economic system that caused the one that they've just come out of. Not really an idyllic past, and certainly, no matter how much you colorise these films, you can't realistically make it any better. People in those days suffered a great deal in ways that lots of people these days are about to find out big time, because gosh, those stock market crashes are going to have a huge effect on their lives, even though they don't realise it at the moment. Still, never mind, I'm sure the people in charge will make sure that the brown people get to suffer for it, which would make Paul happy. And in the past, let's not forget, there was a major scourge with all of those dangerous Irish people in London who couldn't be trusted because of all the crime they brought with them. Yes, and then there was the ever-growing threat of the Jews. Naturally. Yes. Don't imagine pasts. If you find out about the past, you will realise it is very, very, very similar today. Same forces are in operation, and it's always the people at the bottom who are told that other people are the problem rather than the ones that run everything. Anyway, do have a glorious present and indeed future. Do enjoy it.